They laughed when Marcus and Angela Johnson moved into the gated community. They whispered behind their backs, saying things like, "How did they afford this place? Probably stretching loans they can't maintain. Give it a year, they'll be gone." The neighbors smiled to their faces but smirked when they turned away, because to them Marcus and Angela were outsiders, not just because they were new, but because they were black, and in a neighborhood built on generational wealth, privilege, and exclusion, the Johnsons were seen as an intrusion, a reminder that the world was changing in ways the old guard didn't like. And leading that old guard were the Kingsleys, Richard and Catherine, self-appointed royalty of the neighborhood, dripping in arrogance, hosts of the most exclusive dinners, chairs of every committee, gatekeepers of every event, and the first to mock the Johnsons with their thinly veiled insults. At the block party, Catherine walked past Angela and said, "Oh dear, that's such a brave choice of car. Maybe next year you'll treat yourself to something classier," smirking as if Angela's midnight black SUV was unworthy of the driveway it sat in. Richard chimed in later at the HOA meeting, "We must maintain standards here. We don't want the wrong type of influence degrading our community values." Neighbors chuckled softly, some uncomfortably, but no one defended the Johnsons, because power silences truth until someone dares to speak it. And Marcus and Angela? They endured the whispers, they swallowed the smirks, they smiled politely because they knew something the Kingsleys did not, something none of the neighbors could imagine. The Johnsons weren't struggling to fit in. They owned more than anyone at that table could dream. They weren't just wealthy, they were billionaires, entrepreneurs who built empires quietly, never flashing their wealth, never chasing status, because real power never announces itself, it simply waits for the right moment to be revealed. That moment came one evening when the Kingsleys hosted their famed charity gala, a glittering night meant to show off their influence, with politicians, business moguls, and socialites sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers. And when Marcus and Angela arrived, whispers followed them like shadows. "Why are they here? Who invited them? Don't they look out of place?" Catherine smiled thinly as she greeted them, saying loud enough for the crowd to hear, "So glad you could make it. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable at an event of this scale." And Richard leaned close, voice dripping with mockery, "Do try to enjoy yourselves, though I imagine the auction prices may be a bit out of reach." Laughter rippled, subtle, cruel, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than words. But Marcus simply adjusted his cufflinks. Angela held her head high, and they took their seats at the table reserved for guests of lesser importance. Far from the stage, far from the spotlight. But life has a way of turning tables when arrogance blinds the powerful. When the bidding began, Richard stood tall, his voice booming as he bid on a painting, smirking at the gasps when the price climbed past 50,000, then 70, then 100. He won, of course, to applause, basking in the glow of admiration, Catherine's diamonds glittering as she kissed his cheek. But then another item was presented, a rare vintage car, sleek and shining under the lights, and this time, before Richard could even raise his paddle, Angela's calm voice rang out, 200,000. The room went still, eyes widened. Richard chuckled and bid higher, confident, certain he'd put them back in their place. But Angela countered without blinking, Marcus adding bids with casual precision, numbers climbing like a staircase only they could ascend. 250, 300, 400, the room buzzed. Whispers turned to gasps. Richard's smirk began to falter as sweat dotted his brow. But the Johnsons never flinched, never wavered, until finally Richard slammed his paddle down in defeat as Angela claimed the car at $500,000 without breaking a sweat. And the crowd erupted, some in awe, some in disbelief, all realizing in that moment that the outsiders they mocked were wealthier than the so-called royalty they worshipped. Faces turned, tones shifted. Suddenly neighbors who once sneered now smiled too wide, rushing to congratulate the Johnsons, offering champagne, begging for introductions, while Catherine stood frozen, her smile cracked, her crown of superiority shattered in public view. And Marcus, calm and steady, rose to speak when the host asked for closing remarks, his voice carrying across the glittering hall. "My wife and I are honored to contribute tonight, but I want to say this: respect is not measured by money, it is measured by how we treat one another. When we moved here we were treated as less, mocked, dismissed. But tonight proves what I've always known: a value is not in appearances, it's in character, and those who judge others often reveal the poverty of their own hearts." The silence that followed was heavy, the truth undeniable, and for the first time the Kingsleys bowed their heads, their power broken, their arrogance exposed. The Johnsons left the gala that night not as outsiders, but as the true giants of the neighborhood, their dignity intact, their worth undeniable. Justice had been served in the most poetic way, with irony sharp as glass, with humility restored to the arrogant. And as they drove home in their SUV that Catherine once mocked, Angela smiled and whispered, "Funny how things turn," and Marcus replied, Funny how they never saw us coming. But the story doesn't end there, because pride humiliated is pride that plots revenge, and as the Johnsons pulled into their driveway, headlights flashed from across the street. It was Richard Kingsley watching from his car, eyes burning with fury, hands gripping the wheel tight. And as the engine roared to life, his voice, though unheard, carried in the darkness, "You may have won tonight, but this war isn't over. I'll find out who you really are, and when I do, I'll tear it all down." The camera lingers on the Johnsons walking into their home, unaware of the storm Richard is about to unleash, unaware that the man they humbled in public is preparing to strike in the shadows. The narrator's voice drops low, tense, dramatic. They thought the gala was the end of the story, but it was only the beginning, because Richard Kingsley was about to cross a line that would change everything, and the battle between envy and dignity was far from over. Humiliation can crush some men, but for Richard Kingsley it became gasoline poured over a fire already burning. He could not sleep, he could not eat. Every time he closed his eyes he saw Angela Johnson outbidding him. He heard the applause for Marcus's speech. He felt the whispers in the room calling him small, calling him weak, calling him dethroned, and the more he replayed that night the more one truth consumed him. He would not rest until the Johnsons were ruined. So Richard began to dig. He hired investigators, whispered to bankers, leaned on his connections at City Hall, demanding dirt, anything that could prove Marcus and Angela didn't belong, anything that could drag their names through the mud. At first nothing came back, the files were spotless, the businesses thriving, their taxes pristine, but men like Richard never stop at first walls. They look for cracks, for secrets, for shadows, and soon he found one small thread, a charity Marcus's company had once invested in that collapsed years later due to corruption. Marcus had pulled out long before the scandal, but Richard twisted it, telling anyone who would listen that Marcus had been involved, that the Johnsons' billions were not clean, that their empire was built on deceit. He spread rumors at cocktail parties, he planted whispers in the country club, until soon the very neighbors who had started warming to the Johnsons began to doubt again. Angela noticed first, the sudden shift in tone, the smiles that felt colder, the invitations that quietly stopped coming, the way people stared just a moment too long when she walked into the grocery store, and Marcus saw it too when contracts he expected were delayed, when banks suddenly demanded additional documentation, when news reporters began calling with questions about past dealings. It was Richard, it had to be, but Richard was too slick, never saying their names outright always. Letting someone else carry the poison so there was no proof to hold him accountable. 4 weeks had built like a storm, the Johnsons standing tall but feeling the weight pressing heavier with each day, until one night Richard made his boldest move yet. He held a special community meeting in the very hall where the Johnsons had first been mocked. He called it an open discussion on standards. But the agenda was clear: to put Marcus and Angela on trial before the court of gossip and envy, to strip them of dignity in the one place they had thought they were safe. Neighbors filled the room, whispers swirling like snakes, and when Marcus and Angela arrived, all eyes cut to them, some sympathetic, most suspicious, all waiting for a show. Richard stood at the front, papers in his hand, voice booming with false authority. "My friends, I have always believed this neighborhood deserves the highest standards, and though I wish it weren't true, evidence has come to light that raises serious concerns about our newest residents, concerns about shady business dealings, about the true source of their wealth, about whether their success is built on integrity or corruption." Gasps filled the air. Richard waved the papers dramatically. "Here are documents, proof of connections to a fraudulent charity, proof of questionable transactions, proof that the Johnsons may not be who they claim to be." It was a performance, polished and cruel, neighbors muttering, glancing at the Johnsons with doubt, some shaking their heads already convinced. But Marcus rose slowly, calm in the storm, his voice steady. "Richard, you claim to value integrity, yet here you stand twisting half-truths into daggers, waving papers that mean nothing without context, misleading your neighbors because your pride was wounded at a charity gala. Yes, years ago my company invested in a charity, and when corruption was discovered, we pulled out and helped expose it. That's the truth, not your distortion. You see, neighbors, what Richard fears is not that we are corrupt, but that we are successful, not that we lack integrity, but that we carry more of it than he ever could, because real integrity is proven not by tearing others down, but by lifting others up." Angela stepped forward, her voice sharp and unyielding. "And since you want to talk about proof, Richard, let's talk about these." She pulled out her own folder, documents showing the Johnsons' businesses funding scholarships, restoring public housing, creating jobs, and right at the top was a check, a donation they had made to the very community center hosting the meeting. "This is who we are, builders not destroyers, givers not takers, people who believe that where you come from should never limit where you can go." the crowd shifted, whispers changed, the evidence undeniable, the truth shining brighter than Richard's lies, and suddenly applause broke out, neighbors rising to their feet, cheering not for Richard's power, but for the Johnsons' resilience. Richard's face twisted in rage, his papers falling forgotten to the floor, his power slipping through his fingers, his plan backfiring spectacularly as he realized what he had done. He hadn't exposed the Johnsons, he had exposed himself, his envy, his desperation, his lack of character. Marcus looked him dead in the eye and said quietly, "You thought you could bury us, Richard, but you forgot, we are the roots, and roots only grow stronger under pressure." The meeting ended with the Johnsons standing taller than ever, the neighbors embracing them, trust restored, justice once again served, the tables turned yet again, leaving Richard broken, his reputation cracking, his crown of influence shattered in front of the very people he sought to control. But as Marcus and Angela walked home that night, hand in hand, their spirits lifted, their neighbors now allies, they didn't see the shadow watching from across the street, Richard sitting in his car, his face twisted, his voice a whisper only he could hear. "You think you've won, but you don't know what I know, you don't know the secret I've uncovered, and when I reveal it, not even your billions will save you." The camera lingers on Richard's hands gripping a manila folder, a folder with documents too sensitive to be revealed just yet, a folder that could tear open a chapter of the Johnsons' lives they thought was buried forever. The narrator's voice grows low, heavy with tension. They thought the storm had passed, but the darkest clouds had only just gathered. Richard was about to unleash something far more dangerous than rumors, a secret so powerful it could shake the foundation of everything Marcus and Angela had built. And when it surfaced, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The screen fades to black, bold white letters appear.